Hello and welcome to this AIM North America webinar series on FSMA 204. This is session 2 of the series, and we will be discussing the proposed rule and what you need to know. First, I wanted to continue our countdown to November 7th. We're only 53 days away. Real quickly, I would like to go over some housekeeping notes. First, you'll notice you are muted throughout the presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, you will be able to ask our speakers some questions. To do so, use the chat box or the Q&A option that are both located at the bottom of your application screen. We'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. Also, this webinar is being recorded. We will notify all registrants when that recording is available. Now I'll quickly review the AIM North America antitrust policy, which states that we conduct our operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activities shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. Our collaboration and work product policy states that webinars are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. I'm pleased to have two industry experts with us today. Julie McGill, the Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Insights at FoodLogiQ, and Michael Cecchini, Food Safety Leader at SATO America. Welcome, panelists, and Julie, I'll let you get things started with the agenda for today's session.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. And I want to thank AIM for hosting this webinar series. You know, these webinars are meant to provide you with an overview of the proposed rule and really help companies understand how to approach enhanced traceability in their supply chains. And so hopefully you find this information valuable today and the information from the whole series. So in this particular session, we are going to review materials from the FDA public meetings. We're going to provide an overview of the proposed rule, and we're going to share actionable steps that you can take today. So we'll go through 4 areas. We're going to start with the timeline of the rule, and then I'll take you through the FDA's case for enhanced traceability. I'll hand it off to Mike, who is then going to take us through the key concepts of 204. And finally, we'll wrap up with some benefits that can be achieved through enhanced traceability record keeping and some actionable items that you can take back to your organizations. So if you can go to the next slide. So, you know, usually for these webinars, we start with the details of the rule and then we get into the timeline. And today I thought we'd start with the timeline. And so there certainly has been a lot of work that has been done to date, and there's a lot of work that's ahead. So FSMA 204, this section of the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, is all about enhanced traceability. And the proposed rule was published in September of 2020, which seems like a very long time ago. But after many public meetings, and we had an extended public comment period, the final rule is going to be published on November 7th of 2022. And as Michael just said, right, that's 7 short weeks from now. So we can go to the next slide. So the content that you're going to see here, almost every single slide, there's a handful that we created, but most of this content is straight from the FDA. And we kind of wanted to bring together the best of the, you know, the highlights, if you will, of the proposed rule. So here we're talking about, you know, what would this food traceability rule actually do? And this regulation lays out the requirements for collecting and maintaining traceability records for high-risk foods. And this is to support a more efficient and a more accurate way of tracing food products, as well as supply chain visibility. So if we can go to the next slide. So the intended benefits, these are going to include a number of things. The first, of course, is being able to quickly identify the source of contaminated food, which will reduce the impact of a foodborne illness or foodborne outbreak. This will allow regulators to really focus their recall efforts rather than to issue one of those large public health alerts that could implicate an entire product category or a growing region. And we've seen that a lot, for example, with leafy greens, right? When they can't put their finger on it, the entire category gets hit. Another benefit of this is having harmonized information. More efficient traceability is possible when each point in the chain is maintaining traceability information. And this will allow parties, such as regulators, to establish those linkages more quickly. This also aligns with current industry approaches. So Industry approaches like the Produce Traceability Initiative, Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability, the initiatives at GS1, these all promote the use of standards for traceability. And by having a common set of standards that we use and putting together industry guidelines, the vision is that all parties across the supply chain would have more accurate and complete information. This information will then allow regulators, they'll be able to utilize cause analysis and really identify and apply lessons learned from these outbreaks and prevent similar ones from happening in the future. And this all leads to the last point, which is greater transparency plus supply chain intelligence. Really, the more we know, the more effective we can be. So if we can go to the next slide. So this next slide, the case for better traceability, consumers are demanding visibility, right? They want to know about the partners themselves as well as the products that they buy. And new programs at the FDA and CDC are providing more visibility, not only to industry partners, but also to consumers. And quite frankly, things like social media and other platforms are putting information into the hands of consumers at lightning speed. They are more aware. The food system and supply chains, we're changing at an accelerated pace as well, right? I've been in numerous industry discussions where we all agree that technology right now is outpacing the food industry, and we have to do better. So when we look at some of the regulatory approaches, we see that they are continuing to evolve. And we've seen this in something called the New Era of Smarter Food Safety, which is an FDA initiative that's all about tech-enabled traceability, recall modernization, and utilizing tools and new technologies to enable a safer and more streamlined supply chain. And finally, we recognize that this whole idea of the one step up and one step back, that just is not enough, right? That we've got to put some, and when I say we, the industry, and then in this case, this new regulation will really put some guidelines in place that we can all follow that will help, like I said earlier, make those linkages more quickly. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to take a real quick step back and just make sure that everybody on the call, like I said, these are meant to be very educational. So I want to make sure that everybody understands the different regulatory roles. So when we talk about the Coordinated Outbreak Response and Evaluation Network, or CORE, this was created to manage not just outbreak response, but also surveillance and post-response activities. And these are those activities that are related to incidents that are involving multiple illnesses that are linked to FDA-regulated products. So if we go to the next slide, which I think is a really good example, this gives you a side-by-side, right? What does the CDC do? What does the FDA and FSIS do? And, you know, when they showed this in the public meetings, I feel like this really does a nice job of laying out the differences, but also how these two groups really work together. So both play a very important role when we are in the midst of an outbreak. And so working together, you know, FDA sets the policies, there are the investigations, and they both work together, right, to identify the source. So if we can go to the next slide. So let's talk about traceback challenges. You know, in today's global food supply chain, we certainly face many, many challenges, but when there's an outbreak, we need to act fast. And so there can be many hurdles in an investigation when we look at gathering and piecing together consumer information, identifying common sources and points of sale and all the different places that they've been, what did they eat, what did they buy, what they have at home. And when we're requesting data, when we're looking at getting data from industry partners, accessing complete data and getting that data in a timely manner can be a challenge. And the other piece is, for where we're at today, having non-standardized data with multiple identifiers and things that change across supply chains from trading partner to trading partner, right? When a lot number changes for no reason and things like that, those are the hurdles that slow down these investigations. And so, you know, finally, when we talk about these traceback challenges, varying data across the supply chain, even within an organization, right? You can have varying data from facility to facility, and even same parties, right? what was delivered to the restaurant might not match what was shown as received at the restaurant. And so we need to do a better job of gathering this enhanced traceability data. So now that I've laid the foundation and talked about some of these challenges, I'm going to hand it off to Michael to take you through those key concepts of the proposed rule.
Great. Thank you very much, Julie. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on this. And Julie really set the stage on kind of the timeline and what we're doing. And I really want to kind of talk to, you know, as an organization, what do I need to start looking at to be compliant and to be ready for the FSMA 204. So in the beginning, really, as Julie explained, that FSMA 204 really applies to anyone in the industry who, whether you manufacture, you process, you pack, or you hold food, you know, it's about getting the traceability of that information set up and put into action. And one, they're really looking at, can it help limit the number of recalls by identifying the issues and its root causes ahead of time to allow the entire food supply chain to keep contaminated foods from reaching the store shelves and restaurant tables before the event evolves into a bigger issue. So some of the data that you're looking to get, we'll kind of talk to, and there's additional data you need to get. We need to start looking at how are we going to put together a detailed description of any relevant reference records. You know, what processes are we going to have in place? We've got to start compiling the list of any foods found on the Food Traceability List, which we'll provide and the FDA has provided. A detailed description of how the traceability lot codes were assigned. And then you have to keep any other information that's needed to understand the data provided within the required records. So next, page 14. So again, I just want to reiterate, FSMA 204 in plain and simple terms elevates the transparency and enhancement for food traceability and record keeping. According to the FDA, it's to help establish clear tracing of a food's product source when it's needed to address food safety risks. That's the nuts and bolts of what we're doing here and what we need to be doing. So next slide, please. So the goal is to revolutionize food safety and illness prevention for consumer protection by using technology to use and track our critical tracking events and our key data elements. The food industry is going to be able to build more transparency within the food system to reveal any vulnerabilities and get to the root cause much quicker. It's going to allow the government to be able to more quickly identify where any issues are and being able to allow customers and end users to be able to identify whether they're part of this recall. So next is the item list. And if you can look on this, the item list, the most important thing that we can talk about is this is the initial item list. This list can and will change going forward. The government has said that things will be added, things might be removed, but this is the initial list. So it's important that as an organization, you take a look at where you are in the supply chain, what you deal with, and if you manage or deal with any of these foods. So next. So we look at, again, using technology to track the CTEs and the KDEs so we can build more transparency to get to the root cause of these much quicker. We have to understand that there are numerous KDEs depending on where you are in the supply chain. If you're a grower, if you're in shipping and sending, receiving, if you're a first receiver of seafood, if you're a transformational supplier, or if you're a creation, you have to create your traceability lot codes, and those should carry through the supply chain, and they have to be established and assigned when the organization, the transformation creator, or the creation of the event occurs. So where possible, they can reuse you can reuse your KDEs provided that the immediate previous source to meet the requirements are met, the traceability product identifiers. So next, please. So we look at electronic record keeping. It's not yet been established as the standard under FSMA 204, but it's imperative that you start to identify how you're going to be able to keep and maintain these records electronically, because you're going to have to make these records available to the government within 24 hours of being requested. And there, in certain cases, depending on the issue, you're also going to be expected to be typed up in an electronic spreadsheet should they need assistance during an outbreak or recall or other public health crisis. So it's important that as an organization, you start to look at what are we doing now and what can we start to think about as far as keeping electronic records of these particular items. So next, please. So if we start to look at, here, there's so many different handoffs and partners across the supply chain. And as a group or an organization, you have to start to look at how many of these roles do I fit into? How many of these areas in the supply chain am I responsible for, or do I participate in? And I need to keep and maintain records for all of these separately. So you have to understand if I receive, if I transform things, if I create new items, I have to keep records of those across those different supply chain points. So next is kind of one of the most important things we kind of look at, especially if you're new to this, is I'm getting into this. What do I need to do now? What's the minimum I need to do to be compliant? First, you have to understand what items are on this list that I deal with. And I have to understand what are the capture and store timelines. How do I have the capabilities, or how can I create the capabilities to respond to a request for information within 24 hours? Do I have, or can I get a process in place when events are triggered? What steps do I need to take? What information I need to provide? I need to familiarize myself with the CTEs and understand what the key data elements are that I'm required to track and store based on where I am in the supply chain. And again, you might be in multiple places in that supply chain. So you have to understand, I have to keep separate KDEs for each place where I am in the supply chain. You have to make sure that they're captured and stored in a way that's easily accessible. You have to have a process in place where it's available for you to get to that information quickly. And I think more importantly is start talking to your supply chain partners about what are they doing. You know, what are they doing to prepare for 204? Do they have a process in place? What can you do to get your process in place that works well with what they're doing? And as Julie, I think, mentioned before also, is, you know, look at how can we harmonize our labels across suppliers? And let's consider using labels that align with the industry standards, you know, whether it's a PTI label, a seafood specific label, a GS1 label. Start to look at what I can do to make my data capture process easier so I can look at being able to respond. And then again, start vetting traceability solutions now. Don't wait. Start looking at what's out there, you know, features, start looking at what features you need and what solutions offer that, and start to think about what I can do to prepare my company and my organization to be ready for this rule when it's enacted. So next slide, please. And at the end, and I believe this will be sent out, we've attached a link to resources. So this is going to tell you what the proposed rule is, what the list is. So I would encourage everyone in here to go in, click on these links, take a look at how it's going to affect you and what you can start doing again to be compliant and be ready to be compliant. So next, I believe that that is it. Julie, I think you were going to handle wrap up.
Yep, I will do the wrap up. And actually, I want to thank, we had one of the attendees ask a question, and it literally, they were anticipating your next slide, Mike. They said, you know, where can I get a list of KDEs and CTEs? I'm like, we have a slide for that. So we will be sharing the deck with the group just to let everyone know so that you can get to those links. I will say the FDA has excellent resources on their website. Very thorough, everything from 204 at a glance, where it's just the synopsis, all the way to full on, you know, supply chain examples where you walk through a salad kit with different FTL items and how do you track those and what's the events and what is all the data that you need to capture. So great question. So to wrap things up for the group, a couple of things. Number one, like I said, the final rule will be published on November 7th, 2022. So that is coming up very quickly. Once that is published, there will be a timeline for which compliance will be required. And in the proposed rule, they were proposing 24 months. And so there's a period of like the consent decree. So with the official timeline in what's in the proposed rule, that would take us to January of 2025. But that could change. So when this final rule comes out, we're anticipating that timeline's going to stay, but it could move a little bit. The other thing, and we touched on this in the presentation, is collaborate with your trading partners and industry associations. For example, Mike and I both participate in AIM work groups where technology providers are talking about the proposed rule. GS1, the produce associations, grocery associations, food service, et cetera, they are all talking about this. So if you're part of some of those industry associations, I strongly recommend that you get a seat at the table and have those conversations with those industry associations. And the other one are your trading partners, right? There are a number of trading partners that have robust traceability solutions already in place today. They're capturing critical tracking events. They're asking you for this data. Now that data might need to be enhanced once the final rule comes out. So today you're sending a set of key data elements. That list might expand because, as Mike talked about, things like first receiver information, traceability lot code data, et cetera. There might be some extended records that you're going to have to share on top of what you share today. And when you read the language from the FDA and what's in the proposed rule, et cetera, it talks about, you know, here's what you collect today, enhanced traceabilities, you know, adding to that list. And then finally, determine what you do well, and then determine where you need help. Because certainly today, a lot of the data that we talked about, folks are collecting information, advanced ship notice on your invoices, bills of lading, et cetera. But when you start to take a look at the additional attributes that need to be captured, you want to make sure that in the processes you have today, in the systems, et cetera, that you're collecting all of those pieces of data. And as the FDA has currently outlined, their expectation is that you could provide that data within 24 hours in a sortable spreadsheet. And if you need to do that, you're going to have to figure out, can I pull all that data together? Am I able to extract it? What systems am I going to need to touch? What partners do I need to get that data from? So even ahead of the rule, I think the message for us today to the group is really, there are things that you can do ahead of the proposed rule being finalized to start having those conversations in your organizations and start that journey. So with that, Mike, Alan, I will hand it to you to take us through the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for that wrap up and the information you provided today. Thank you, Mike, as well. So I'll get right into the questions here with the remainder of this time. We'll start with, what is the proposed timeline for compliance?
Mike, do you want to take that?
Sure.
Yes.
The proposed timeline again is I believe what, January 2025 is when the government is targeting for compliance to be enacted initially. once we see what happens here in November with the rule, I'm sure there'll be more data given, but the government is targeting 2025, so it gives you time to get processes and policies in place.
Yeah, I think the other thing with the timeline is that there have been on the FDA's website, and somebody else asked I was just typing another question about, will we get the links? Yes, we will send those. On the FDA's website, one of the things on the 204 landing page is they have an FAQ, and where people have been asking questions, and those questions continue to be shared and the answers shared. One of the questions is there going to be a staggered timeline? Because for some of the previous regulations, they've had different timelines for different trading partners, different size companies, et cetera. In the current, as it's written today, the proposed rule is that everyone would come on at the same time. And the FDA took into account, just what they're asking for. There are exemptions for certain smaller companies and things like that. But big picture, their vision is that this would be everyone comes on, compliance would be at the same time. And so, we don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you for certain if the dates are going to change. But right now, it would be taking us to January 2025.
Great, thank you, Julie. Another question we received is, the industry has been talking about FSMA 204 for a good while now. What is the opinion of this panel in terms of those already going down the road to prepare versus those who are still not considering it? From their point of view, it seems the suppliers, processors, and distributors are not giving this the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'll break this down into two things, and then Mike, if you want to, add anything, feel free. I would say a couple things. Number one, there's been a lot of industry work in certain areas. So two of the big categories in FSMA 204 are produce and seafood. And both of those categories have industry initiatives that have been in place for quite a while. And just in my own experience, visiting distributors, visiting suppliers, visiting, restaurants and grocery stores, there are a lot of products that are marked today with GS1 128s, with our, 2D codes, with RFID, et cetera. And in some instances, the partner may or may not be using it. And so there are, for example, produce companies that adopted the PTI label. They've been using that for a long time. And there are certain partners in their supply chain that use that to capture that data, and other partners who don't. So I would say, for those who are aligned with PTI, they're a little bit further down the path, and they've built the foundation to get ready for compliance. I would also say, because your question's a good one, there are a lot of folks that don't know, they're not even aware of FSMA 204, and that's going to be a challenge. And I think where we meet that challenge is through these industry groups that I talked about. We need, whether it's the produce associations, GS1, IFDA, IFMA, FMI, et cetera, we need AIM, right? We need to be educating the masses, right? We need to be getting the word out. The FDA is doing it too, right? They're doing their part as well, but that's why we're doing this series, right? We want to help folks understand, here's what's coming, here's what you'll need to do. And when the final rule is in place, AIM does plan on doing webinars as well. I am certain, just like they did with the proposed rule, that the FDA will put out quite a bit of, recorded content, new content on their website, et cetera. So, it's going to be a group effort, right, to get folks to the point of compliance. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration, trading partner to trading partner, FDA to the community, and then also associations. So anything to add, Mike?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you on that. And I think the challenge that some companies were facing was, with what's been happening the past few years, there really hasn't been any in-person trade events. So a lot of this information is being sent out like this, or had been being sent out, digitally, and doing virtual calls, and we're not sure how many people are responding, to a virtual call if you're not going to your trade industry specific events where that's being discussed more in person and it's live. So I think some of it is just getting the education out there virtually because we have not been able to meet in person.
Yeah. And I think too, and just for the group, it's like, I used to be at GS1, right? So I used to be on the standard side, and certainly, understanding that a lot of the adoption comes from that collaboration between trading partners. So when you have a partner, whether it's a large distributor, setting the guidelines for their supply chain partners, right? Produce guys, we need PTI labels, we need XYZ, et cetera. Whether it's a grocer saying, here's what our supplier requirements are, right? With this pending regulation, here's what we're going to need from you, right? So there is going to be some, on top of the FDA's education, there'll be some pieces and parts that are part of the industry partners are going to engage as well. So yeah, Mike, I see there's a question too that talks about, it says, do I understand correctly that no specific label templates have been agreed upon yet? Who is working on the label standards? So right now, the FDA does not have any requirements in there related to barcodes, RFID, right? Nothing around data carriers. Those are voluntary standards that are adopted by the industry today, just like it. If we're talking about point of sale, right? How we get UPCs and barcodes on those consumer units is through the parties that require them from their trading partners. So in the proposed rule, and I anticipate in the final rule, they make reference to GS1, to ISO, to different standards groups and things like that. And they promote the value of standards. But what they don't do is prescribe the standards. So Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think if people continue to monitor and look at GS1, they're looking at what data, what information, but as we deal with, different companies through the supply chain, there's different formats that companies want to have for their labels. So as long as the relevant information is there and it's able to be captured, they can have the label kind of formatted how they want. As you mentioned, there are industry specific, PTI compliant labels. There are requirements for what that is and what that looks like. And I can see where maybe different trade associations, will start to look at a consistent label that works best with their industry and make recommendations. But as you said, you don't see them ever requiring a specific format.
Yeah, it's a little bit different in healthcare. For those of you who work in that space, that is prescribed. For food, it's a little bit different, but great question. The next question that I see on the Q&A, and this is a really good one too, and Mike Allen, I think we can share some content here. Are there good case studies available, or could you talk about that dive into how multi-party physical asset tracking was solved digitally? I think AIM has some great materials. And then I also think that we could get some case studies from folks like GS1.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll reach out to the person who asked this question to provide those as well. So thank you for sending that question. That will wrap up the questions here today. Appreciate your time today, Julie and Mike. Real quickly, just want to say, here's our contact us slides. If there's any questions or comments that you have, I want to thank everyone again for their time today. Thank you especially to Mike and Julie.